It's 9:17 on a quiet Tuesday night. The dishes are finally done. There's a show playing on the TV, but if we're honest, nobody's really watching it. Your dog is stretched out across the room in that same spot they've claimed 1,000 times before. And then it happens. You glance up, just for a second, and your dog is already looking at you. Not wagging, not staring at the treat cabinet, not waiting for you to reach for the leash, just looking. The kind of look that lingers a little too long. 4 seconds, maybe 5. Long enough that you notice it. Long enough that somehow you're the one who looks away first. Most moments like this disappear almost immediately. We go back to folding laundry, scrolling our phones, answering one more text, thinking about tomorrow's grocery list. Life takes over. But every now and then, something strange happens. 2 days later, maybe a week later, that moment comes back. The look, the silence, that odd feeling you couldn't quite explain, almost like your dog was trying to tell you something. And here's the thing. Most people never stop long enough to ask themselves this question. What if the longest conversation you've ever had with your dog happened without a single sound? No barking, no commands, no words at all. Just a glance across a room. I know how that sounds. A little dramatic, maybe. But stay with me for a second. Because some of the most important things humans communicate aren't spoken either. Think about the last time someone you loved looked at you during a difficult moment. Maybe they didn't say anything. Maybe they didn't need to. Sometimes a look says, I'm here. Sometimes it says, I understand. Sometimes it says more than an entire conversation. Dogs seem to know this instinctively. They've spent thousands of years beside us, watching, learning, paying attention. They've seen us celebrate promotions, cry in kitchens at midnight, sit quietly on the edge of a bed after receiving bad news. They've watched us during moments we never explained to anyone else. And somehow, they learned to read things we never said out loud. Maybe that's why certain memories stay with us. Not because they're dramatic, not because they're rare, because they feel important. Like something brushed against the surface of your awareness and then slipped away before you could grab it. If you've loved a dog for years, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You might never have told another person. You might not even have a name for it, but you've felt it. That moment when your dog seemed different. Not physically different, emotionally different. The eyes looked softer somehow, quieter, almost thoughtful. And for one brief second, you felt as though you were being studied by someone who knew you better than you knew yourself. That's not silly. And it isn't sentimental nonsense either. In fact, scientists have spent years trying to understand why the bond between humans and dogs feels so different from any other relationship we have with another species. Researchers have observed dogs and owners doing something incredibly simple, not playing, not training, not interacting, just looking at one another, and again and again. They found evidence that something meaningful happens in those silent exchanges. Something measurable. Something real. But before we get to the science, There's another question worth asking. Maybe we've been looking at this backward the entire time. Most people see their dog staring at them and immediately wonder what the dog wants. Food, a walk, a belly rub, that squeaky duck they've been obsessed with since they were 8 weeks old. But what if, once in a while, the question isn't what they want? What if it's what they're sharing? Because something interesting happens as many dogs grow older. The wild puppy, who ricocheted around the house like a furry pinball, begins to settle. The constant excitement softens. The frantic energy fades. And something else takes its place. Presence. A quieter kind of connection. A different language. Not built on movement. Not built on noise. Built on simply being there. And that's where these moments become fascinating. Because sometimes the most meaningful conversations don't begin when somebody starts talking. They begin when everything gets quiet enough to notice. So let's go back to that Tuesday night. The dishes are done. The television hums in the background. Your dog is lying across the room, looking at you. This time, don't rush away from the moment. Stay there for another second. Maybe two, because there may be much more happening inside that silence than either of you realizes. A woman named Carol once told a story she couldn't stop thinking about. Not because of what happened, because of what she missed. For almost 12 years, her golden retriever followed the exact same routine every evening. Around 8:30, he'd circle twice on his favorite rug, let out one long sigh, then settle down for the night. The same sigh, the same rug, the same routine, year after year. Nothing remarkable about it. Until there was. Carol started noticing something small. The kind of thing most people would brush aside. She'd be reading a book and suddenly realize her dog was already looking at her. Not begging, not restless, just watching. She'd stand up to refill her coffee and catch him staring. At 2 in the morning, she'd wake up and see his eyes open in the darkness, quietly pointed in her direction. Not every night. Not constantly. Just enough that it felt different. But different is a difficult thing to trust, especially when you love someone. We explain things away. We tell ourselves stories. He's getting older. He's having an off day. He's probably hearing something outside. That's what Carol did. Most of us would. Because when changes happen slowly, they don't feel like changes. They feel normal. Weeks later, her dog was diagnosed with a serious health condition. And if you ever notice unusual behavioral changes in your own dog, it's always worth talking with your veterinarian. But years afterward, Carol barely talked about the diagnosis. She talked about the look. She talked about those moments when she'd glance up and find him watching her. She talked about the realization that something had changed long before she understood what she was seeing. And one sentence stayed with me. Years later, she said, "I don't regret what I didn't know. I regret what I almost noticed." Whew. Think about that for a second. That's a different kind of heartbreak. Not guilt, not failure. Something softer. The ache of realizing you were standing right beside a message you couldn't quite read. Because love is like that. Love always believes there was one more clue, one more glance, one more moment it should have understood. If you're listening right now and thinking about a dog you've lost, maybe one whose collar still hangs somewhere in your house, I want you to hear this. Missing a signal doesn't mean you didn't love them. The people who worry most about missing something are usually the people who cared the deepest, the people who paid attention, the people who tried. And yet all of this leads to an even bigger mystery. Why don't dogs simply tell us? Why the subtle signals? Why the long looks? Why not something obvious? The answer reaches much further back than our living rooms. Long before dogs slept on memory foam beds or stole spots on the couch, their ancestors lived in social groups where weakness came with consequences. An injured animal could attract attention. A vulnerable animal could lose status. A struggling animal could become a target. In the wild, survival often depended on appearing stronger than you felt. And while our dogs no longer live those lives, pieces of those ancient instincts still remain. You can see traces of them everywhere. Researchers studying wolves, wild canids, primates, and other social mammals have observed similar patterns for decades. Animals frequently mask weakness until they absolutely can't anymore. It's old programming, ancient programming, far older than any dog park or chew toy. And that's why silence can be misleading. A quiet dog isn't always a comfortable dog. A calm dog isn't always carefree. And a dog who isn't asking for help may still need support. Their silence doesn't automatically mean everything is fine. Sometimes it means instinct is still speaking. Even now. And here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. Because while dogs inherited those survival instincts, they also evolved something extraordinary. Something almost unique in the animal world. They learned how to connect with us. Not through intimidation. Not through dominance. Not through force. Through relationship. Through trust. Through attention. In 2015, researchers at Azabu University in Japan conducted a study that stunned a lot of people in the scientific community. They looked at what happened when dogs and owners simply held eye contact. Nothing fancy, no tricks, no commands, just a shared gaze. What they found was remarkable. The longer the eye contact lasted, the higher oxytocin levels rose in both species. The humans and the dogs. In some pairs, those increases climbed well beyond 100%. That's not a small shift. Oxytocin is closely linked to attachment, trust, caregiving, and emotional bonding. In other words, biology itself responds when you and your dog share a meaningful look. Your brain notices. Their brain notices. Something physical happens. Something measurable. Which might explain why certain memories stay with us for years. Why one glance from a dog can sometimes hit harder than 100 barks. Why a few quiet seconds can leave an emotional imprint that lasts a lifetime. And maybe that's why that Tuesday night matters. Maybe that's why those moments linger. Because beneath the surface, far more is happening than either of you can see. And maybe the question isn't whether the look means something. Maybe the question is what your dog hopes you'll notice.